I think so.
I like this, I have room to spread out. Hey, Tony.
Turn your mic off, turn it back on. All right, we got 6:30. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Beth Bailey?
Here.
Marge Jorgensen?
Here.
Tony Platt? Here. John Kraus?
Here.
Laura Logan?
Here.
Lisa Panzer?
Here.
Chad Creedy?
Here.
Gary Spielman?
Here.
Joanne Pedis?
Here.
All right, please stand. Join me in a pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance. All right, we have minutes from the regular meeting on July 13 and special meeting on August 5th.
I move for approval.
Second.
A motion and a second then for approval of the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Those not, same sign. All right. Thank you for joining us. The slight crowd. Notice from our original setting in the ESC, you guys got better seats out here in the auditorium, so hope you enjoy that. Thank you for joining us. No public comment. So that moves on to announcements. No announcements. So down to agenda. We'll have somebody make a motion to adopt.
Also move.
Second.
Motion and a second to adopt the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Those not, same sign. All right, we have an agenda. That takes us to reports presented by the administration, starting with 9.1, wellness update. Went so fast through that, caught you off guard a little bit.
All right. So, I can read this. Is it coming? Do I just go ahead?
Oh, Mary's gonna pull it up for
Mary
you.
gonna do it? Okay. Go, Mary. Let's trust Mary more than the.
Is this in our, this is in our.
All right. So do I go ahead from here then, Mary? Am I in control now? Or not? There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to review what we did last year as far as our wellness program, and then give you a little preview of what we're looking at for this year. Part of what we need to do also is we look at that, we look at the different policies in place for wellness, and we always have to have that approved every year. So first is just a list of who was involved in our meetings last year as part of our team. I will assume most of those will continue. I'll be putting out just an email invite to them again this year to see if they want to continue on our committee. A couple of our friends sitting up there are on our committee. So our goals for 1920, we tried to make things more inclusive for all the employees, trying to be a little more well-rounded in what we offered. We coordinated with Blue Zone staff and courts to try and offer more things, and WEA, just again to try to diversify what we were doing a little bit more. Worked with the American Heart Association. We were able to pull in things from all of those groups. Stacy shared out lots and lots of resources again from courts and WEA and other resources that she came across. There was indication from staff that they wanted to look into more stress reduction and mindfulness type activities, so we brought some of those in. And we did those again this August. Some of those things are in our professional development for staff. We had 3 staff incentive programs, which I'll talk about as we get into here. And we wanted to look into social media a little bit more to see what we could do. We started a Facebook page and invited all staff to join who were interested, and tried to get some things out on that Facebook page, hoping to expand that again, and we were able to continue our fitness program. So we pretty much just got through all of our goals. Even with the closure, we kind of tried to keep some things going for staff. So the next slide, these are just a couple of the things that we received from our health assessment. So this first one just shows where staff was ready to change, what kind of areas that they were looking into changing. So, you know, weight, physical activity, lifestyle were the biggies. And then the next one shows the difference from 19 to 20, the 2 different years of the assessment, and those areas of preventive care, physical activity, nutrition, stress and coping, tobacco, and chronic conditions. Just looking at how staff ranked those items. Looks like we had actually some pretty good improvements in some of those areas. 3 staff incentives that we had last year. We had Step It Up, My One Thing, and Flushing It. So we tried to hit the 3 different areas. So My One Thing was trying to look at stress management. So that one was kind of like one thing you could give up that maybe kind of take off your plate, or one thing you wanted to not necessarily take on, but maybe improve in. And so maybe it was getting a better night's sleep, or finding time for yourself to exercise or meditate or read daily, more of that mental health piece. Step It Up was what it was, steps, and that one we did in the spring when everybody was off, to try and get people outside and get them moving and keep up that exercise piece. And then the Flushing It we did in the winter time, about kind of that January when people are looking to lose weight. So instead of a weight loss challenge though, we focused in on healthy eating. So it focused on fruits and vegetables and drinking water. Kind of flushing your system was the take behind that. And we averaged probably 80-ish people per incentive. We had one of them that was like a little over 100. So it just kind of varies, but I would say 80 to 85 is probably our average with the staff that participate. The next 2 slides are a couple of things that, just examples of things that have flowed out through Stacy. Through HR, she's looked at a lot of things with courts. So one is their wellness program that employees can participate in. They can link up their Fitbits, Apple Watches, whatever they have. They can count steps. There's all different ways. They can just do it manually too, but they can earn points, and then they can get Amazon gift cards through participating in these different health resources that they have. And it's not all exercise. There's things like going to doctor's appointments, getting your flu shot, having a massage. There's all different kinds of health pieces that count in those systems. And then there's also health coaching, which she rolled out to staff this year. Free that we get through courts, and they just need to call and they can work with a coach. So she's getting numbers. Actually tomorrow she's meeting with the people from courts that are going to give her all the numbers of participation on these, so we don't have numbers yet. And then the Health Care Anywhere video visits. Really tried, pumping those out this year, and that became really valuable this spring when people needed to visit a medical provider and weren't able to get there. So this was a lot more utilized this spring. This is the wellness policy that we look at every year. If you look at the metrics, we're pretty consistent. We still have those 2 areas that we're kind of in the yellow. I just kind of do green, yellow, red, just to show that they're not areas that we aren't totally solid on. So one is that the health, gotta get my glasses on though. Let me see. One is the health curriculum piece. And I can't even read the other one, to tell you the truth.
Not using recess as a.
Oh, that's it, yep, I couldn't
reward
remember,
teacher.
I couldn't read all the ones. And this one is so small, I'm sorry. Yeah, so we have health curriculum. At the elementary, that one just kind of keeps us at the yellow because we don't have a focused or a set health curriculum K-5. We have it, it's infused, and you'll see it in science and social studies, you'll see it in Phi-Ed, but we don't like have a single program across the board, so that's why we have just kept that one in yellow. And the same thing, thank you, with the recess. I think we're getting much better at that, but there are still some instances where recess is held. I think with a lot of the social emotional learning that we're doing with professional development, we're seeing a lot of flip and thought on that. Some of those book studies, the Hacking School Discipline, the Discipline with Dignity, Carrots and Sticks, those different things that we're offering to teachers talk a lot about different ways to approach just handling whether it's behaviors or missed work or different things that we can do with students. So I think we're seeing a lot of that thinking change and how we can approach problems differently with kids. So I'm, hoping to see that one move ahead. So, and then I think, then the Smarter Lunchroom Scorecard is kind of tied with that policy as well. So we started this in last year. And then Stephanie upgraded our results for this year, so we've made some improvements in that Smarter Lunch card, and you have the access to the rubric if you want to take a look at it. But we have a number of schools that have improved on that or stayed the same. So the goal is they want us to be all at about a 43 to 45, so we're getting pretty close to that. As an average, as a district, we're there. And then this is just looking kind of where we're headed this year. Stacy and I really just met and did some brainstorming. We haven't met as a whole group yet, but we want to continue those incentives and do 3 a year this year again. Continue with those professional development offerings, kind of, again, being well-rounded, but focusing in on mental health, stress reduction, those kinds of things, and then the student, their social emotional learning. Look into Quartz and M3 and see what else they can offer for us with some other programs. We're going to try to do some blood pressure screenings. Look a little further into American Heart Association. They have a worksite certification. It's similar to like what we did with Blue Zones, a lot of the same kinds of concepts in that. So we're working with our rep to see if we can get that done this year. Looking at some more financial wellness. We'll continue the HRA and biometric screening next May. And then Stacy's hoping to work on a monthly newsletter update that we can get out to all staff. And this is just kind of our timeline, how we're looking for the year, just to have a little something going every month. That's kind of our goal. That's it. Questions?
I know we send a whole bunch of surveys out all the time, but it'd be interesting, and I don't know, the last time we did this, do a survey on just what staff likes about our current wellness initiatives, what they would rather have.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever timing that fits in, so we don't overdo
Right.
staff with too many surveys. That might be nice.
Right, we usually get some of that from the HRA screening we do in the spring, because they'll indicate in there like what areas of wellness they want to work at, so that's kind of where we glean, but you're right, it's been a couple years since we've actually just surveyed them as a staff, so it's a good idea.
And then do you have a feeling for what kind of involvement we're getting from staff?
Like I said, in the incentives, we've had at least 80 per incentive, some a little more. And then those other programs, I'm not sure on the numbers. Like I said, Stacy is meeting tomorrow and they're gonna give her more solid numbers on that. So, but like the coaching and the online doctor appointments and things, so.
Laura, would you refresh my memory, and you might have said it,
Mhm.
the Smarter Lunchroom Scorecard, is that tied in with Blue Zones? Or is that a different entity?
It was included in Blue Zones, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's also part of that wellness policy too, though.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mhm. Anything else?
So I know, well, most of the things you talked about, other than the first slide, what you talked about the most was the health wellness, but the other areas of wellness is you're continuing to address as well, the financial wellness and
Mm-hmm,
emotional and things, so
yeah.
thank you for
Yeah, I'm
taking
trying
care
to
of all
pull
that.
You bet. Good to go?
Anything else? All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That moves us to 9.2, resolution, taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in the amount not to exceed $5 million.
You just want to say 5 million.
All right. Just a reminder about cash flow borrowing as it relates to school districts and to us in particular. So due to the timing of revenues and expenditures, many school districts use short-term borrowing to meet their cash flow needs. So this is a known issue across the state, so it is authorized by state statute that allows districts to do this. So for several years, we had used a combination of levy and aid anticipation note that we got through PMA, who is our financial advisor, as well as a local line of credit. And so that levy and aid anticipation note was something that we would get in October and have for the entire year. And then we would use the local line of credit to fill in on top of that as needed. For the past 2 years, however, we've only used a local line of credit to meet our cash flow needs. So we've gotten to the point where we didn't need that underlying basis from the levy and aid anticipation note, and we could just use a line of credit, which is, it's a good thing. So the process that we use is we obtain proposals from local banks, and then we select the proposal that's in the best interest of the district. And then we draw on that line of credit during the fiscal year as needed, and pay it off as soon as we're able to try to keep our interest down. So for the past 2 years, we've had a $5 million line of credit. During 18-19, the most that we had drawn out at one time was $4.15 million. During this past year, the most that we used at any one time was $3.04 million. So again, that kind of speaks to the health of our cash flow improving. So for this year, despite the fact that our usage went down last year, we're again going to use a $5 million line of credit in order to provide the district with the flexibility to address changes that may come from the timing of revenues and expenditures related to COVID-19. So in the event that we have additional expenditures because of that, or because some of our revenues change from the state, it's just good to have that flexibility to make sure that we can actually meet all of our financial needs. So we sent a letter to 3 local banks seeking proposals on our $5 million line of credit. We received 2 responses, one from Horicon Bank and one from National Exchange Bank and Trust. So last year, the interest rate and National Exchange had our line of credit last year. The interest rate last year was 30-day LIBOR, so at the time that we approved the line of credit last August, LIBOR was 2.21%. So the interest rate last year was 30-day LIBOR plus 165 basis points, or 1.65%, with a rate not to exceed 4.5%, and then no origination or application fees on the line of credit. So in August, the 2.21 plus the 1.65 would be the interest rate that we had. So the proposals from the 2 banks are there. So Horicon, their proposal for an interest rate was prime minus 0.5% with a rate not to exceed 3.75%. So the prime interest rate is, they basically define it as the interest rate that a bank would use for their best customers. Basically, it's someone who has very good credit and they know is going to be able to meet the the payback needs. Typically, it's related to the rate that's set by the Fed. So right now, current prime is 3.25, which is pretty low. So the federal rate is 0.25. Prime is typically 3% above that. It dropped. They dropped it when the Fed dropped their rate as a result of the economy. And it's anticipated that it's going to stay that way. The Fed has said that they aren't going to increase their rates until the economy comes back. So the idea is that these rates are expected to stay low for potentially the next 2 years. So current prime is 3.25%, which means that the effective rate for the line of credit would be 0.5% lower than that, or 2.75%, and no origination or application fees. So the proposal from National Exchange was a fixed interest rate of 2.95%, and then no origination or application fees there. So the offers were close, and there's, I think, definitely, you could see both sides of the coin there, and it was really great to have both banks bid. They didn't both bid last year, so it was nice to see that they're continuing to show interest in working with us. So the recommendation, and we spoke with our financial advisor, PMA, and the recommendation is to go with Horicon based on the financial outlook of what's going to happen to the interest rates. This is a very short-term loan for us. It's less than a year. Last year, we did our last draw in January, so we might potentially need to do one next spring, depending if the state changes the state budget and some school funding. But the recommendation from our financial advisors, as well as just the research that's out there on the forecast, says that the rates are going to stay low, and so going with the 2.75% would be a lower interest rate for us. So in order to move forward with this, it would require board approval of the resolution that authorizes a taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in an amount not to exceed $5 million. And then just looking at next steps. So carefully monitor cash flow throughout the year, make timely grant claims to try to limit our interest costs. And then we'll look at our cash flow needs next year to determine the best course of action going forward. We've been really fortunate the last couple years to be improving our cash flow health and not being able to need it as much. But depending upon what happens with the new state budget that will start next year, we'll have to look at it and see what is in the best interest of the district for next year. So we can only focus on 1 year at a time.
Very true.
Any questions?
Anne Marie, I just have a question. In regard to the Horicon Bank interest rates,
Yes.
if we took money, if we say we're going to take the $5 million line of credit and we take $2 million out in October at which would be effectively at the 2.75% interest rate. But then when we do another draw, say in January or February, if the prime went up, then that percentage would be at the higher rate.
Correct.
Okay.
And we only pay interest on the money that we use. So we have it's $5 million that we can use. If we don't draw on it at all, we pay nothing. And so if we draw on $2 million, we only pay interest on the $2 million. And we always try to pay it off as quickly as we can, so that we're only paying interest on what we absolutely need. But yes, depending on the time of the year, if the interest rates were to change, that would be the case.
That would be the case.
Yep.
So we're banking that they're going to stay low based on predictions.
Yes, and I'm kind of torn because I do like, it's good to have something fixed, But just reading everything and what the Federal Reserve put out about committing to keeping their rate low and this prime rate being essentially tied to that. And the banks purposely lowered it after COVID hit. So it's a trend that you see. This prime rate has typically been tied to the economy. So when things go down, this rate goes down, probably more so than some of the other finance rates out there.
Well, I move we accept the proposal from Horicon Bank and issue the resolution authorizing the taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in an amount not to exceed the $5 million.
Second it. All right, we have a motion and a second then. Need a roll, need a roll call vote, please.
Marge Jorgensen,
Yes.
Tony Clark,
Yes.
Chuck Cross,
Yes.
Laura Lirwick,
Yes.
Lisa Tanzer,
Yes.
Chad Reed,
Yes.
Gary Spielman,
Abstain.
Joanne Krajewski,
Yes.
Deb Dillon.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. That moves us on to 9.3. Welcome.
Thank you. So Title IX updates are before you again tonight. Some of you saw this at our Operations Committee meeting a couple of weeks ago. With Title IX, there's been a whole slew of new updates and recommendations for school districts. In May, the U.S. Department of Education and Office for Civil Rights released their final rule, which amends Title IX regulations as we currently see them. So Title IX right now, as everybody knows them, really focuses on gender non-discrimination, and now they're opening it up to defining what sexual harassment means and how sexual harassment can be defined within Title IX. The update includes different publication requirements for us as a school district, notice requirements to the public, complaint and investigation protocol, record-keeping requirements for the district, staff training requirements, and Title IX designations. Wednesday, we'll be meeting with our policy review team with Neola and looking at how we need to revamp all of our policies for the Title IX regulations. Neola has a really good grasp of what that needs to look like and include the language that's very, very specific. So we'll be working through that with them on Wednesday and bringing it to you for the first reading in September. Some of the policy changes will include definitions of terms, definitions of sexual harassment as they pertain to Title IX, Title IX designations, and a detailed grievance procedure for sexual harassment as it falls under Title IX. One of the first things we have to do when we are looking at our policies is we have to determine who's going to do what for Title IX sexual harassment. So the first thing we have to do is we have to name who is going to be responsible for certain aspects. So our Title IX coordinators that we are recommending to you tonight are Jesse Peters and Laura Schieffer. The two of them we put together for various reasons because legal firms and Boardman Clark and WASB have given us different training opportunities and advised us to make sure that we have one male and one female if possible, and to try to take some of that off of building level leadership and take it up to the district level leadership in districts that can do it. Some districts are much smaller than ours and will not be able to do that, so they're going to be having people doing multiple roles, and we're fortunate here that we don't have to do that. Investigators would be Rob Meyer for the students and myself for staff. The initial decision maker would be Anne Marie Malkovich, and the appeal decision maker would be Mark DeStefano. The reason why this is important is because when we meet with Neola on Wednesday, we're going to need to name these people by name in our policies and our handbooks and all of our publications. So we'll need to really know who those people are, and it'll be part of our training for our staff. So we had new teacher orientation started today, and they were so lucky that they got to talk about Title IX right away this morning. So Title IX sexual harassment, the definition, in order to meet sexual harassment under Title IX, it has to meet one of 3 criteria. An employee of the institution is conditioning the provision of an aid, benefit, or service of the institution on an individual's participation in unwelcome sexual conduct. That would be a quid pro quo situation, where if I do this for you, then you'll do this for me. Number 2 would be unwelcome, severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, and denies access to the educational program or actively interferes with the ability to perform one's job. And the third one is sexual assault, stalking, domestic, or dating violence as defined by state law. So one thing that's really important to know with Title IX sexual harassment is it doesn't encapsulate every type of sexual harassment that's out there. The definition is very severe and very concise. So just because something might not fall under sexual harassment as it relates to Title IX, it could fall under sexual harassment in any of the other categories listed up there, including Title VII, the Code of Conduct, PI 9. So we have to kind of use our skill sets, and our Title IX coordinators are going to be extremely important when it comes to figuring out how to meet this criteria. Is this a Title IX issue, or is this a Code of Conduct issue? Is this a Title VII issue? They're going to have to sort that out and then provide those supports to staff and students before it's handed over to the investigators. Training, I alluded to the training piece a little bit. We are very fortunate that we have, that WASB and Boardman Clark have partnered up and come up with training modules for us, so we don't have to seek those on our own. We have secured a membership with them to have unlimited training to these modules, which they just opened up today. So we will be going through those modules. They're live modules and there's recorded ones. So if we are not able to do it at a certain time on a certain day, we will be getting all those modules to us. All staff will receive an awareness level training. And like I said, the new teachers today got a little bit of that. Our administrators last week at Administrator Academy got a little overview, similar to what you guys are getting tonight. The awareness level training looks like they're going to learn how to recognize sexual harassment and whether or not it would be Title IX, what to do if you witness it, what to do if it's reported to you. One of the most important things for them to know is who are the Title IX designees, who do I report this to? It's similar to the mandatory reporting training that all of our district staff are getting as well. Administrators, they've got a little bit of awareness level training last week, and they will be participating in some of these additional modules as well. And then our Title IX designees that I listed on a previous slide, they'll have designation-specific training. So what that means is the coordinators will participate in their coordinator level training, and then they will also cross-train in some of those other components so that if anybody is not available for any reason, we can fill in for one another, or if somebody leaves the district, we've got some cross-training abilities there as well. So tonight, you might have a few questions. After questions, all I need from this piece is to be able to approve the Title IX designations as they're laid out, because those names need to be plastered all over the place for our board policies and our handbooks and our students and staff as we move forward with training. They're going to need to know who they need to go to. So I will take your questions at this time.
So in the committee meeting, you mentioned that this was a pretty extensive document that came out
Yes,
regarding Title IX.
2,000 pages.
Thank you for handling that.
Well, we were lucky that they did provide a brief, so that was helpful, but there's the 2,000 pages, then there was the brief, then there's the module. So it was good timing on their part, I'm sure.
And Nicole, this policy is reflective for students and/or staff.
That's correct. It's students and staff, and that will be new to a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Specific to the policy, it says right in there that you have to designate a name and not a position.
Yeah. Yep. And you're saying, Nicole, the only thing you need approval from us tonight is for the Title IX designations?
Correct,
The
because
people
you
who
will
fill
see
that?
all the policy revisions that we're going to put into play at the September board agenda for the first reading.
Okay. I would move we approve the Title IX designations as presented this evening.
Second?
All right, we have a motion and a second then to approve the Title IX designations as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those not, same sign. All right,
Thank you.
thank you. That moves us to an update on return to school.
Good evening.
Evening.
I have a few updates and points of context for the board and our public viewers this evening. And there will be an opportunity at the end for more questions, comments, or otherwise. But if you need me to elaborate on any individual slide, please don't hesitate to ask me to do that. So the first piece, I think we alluded to it when we initially spoke through the return to school plan adoption, is associated with updated CDC guidance and just the understanding and reality that CDC guidance, which really does also provide some clarifying guidance for DPI relative to health practices and protocols, will continue to be updated as new information becomes available through the medical community. So as it stands right now, there are some subtle adjustments relative to wellness check or health check protocols. That could include things like how long somebody needs to be fever-free before they return with that type of a symptom. Quarantine time, as some people are probably aware, there's been some changing in some of the days designated for quarantining. So essentially, what I want to update the board on is the fact that we have specialists in our district that help us and helped put together that part of the plan. Those are a nursing team or otherwise, and then they work also with DPI's team, which is grounded in some CDC guidance. So they're actually reviewing some of those things. They're going to review them again this week. We're going to talk about it with our return to school team on Thursday. We have another touch base meeting. And then we're going to review and kind of scrub yet again before the school year starts. But just so the board understands, those specific components of the plan are going to be anchored on that expert guidance for us relative to some of the wellness check protocols and any of the references to how long you need to be fever-free, how long you need to stay home or otherwise if you're exposed. Those types of pieces will continue to be updated as part of the plan. Something else that I wanted to take an opportunity to hopefully clarify is that based on the current phasing in our county, I think it would be prudent for us, and based on the fact that that phasing is very likely to stay the same for Dodge County, I think it would be prudent to just affirm the fact that we will be in option B of our plan to start the year. The county is in phase 2. I think some people have seen that there's been a slight uptick in some pieces. I know that was covered relatively well in the local media last week. Not aware of the coverage, for example, this morning per se, but if we look back to the regular updates the county health department has provided, we're still under the 5% threshold, and there are no significant spikes, or otherwise there is a slight uptick. But again, all of my partner superintendents in the region, as well as the Department of Health, are planning on us being in phase 2 as we start the school year. So I think it's reasonable to just affirm the fact that because of that, we are intending as a district to begin the school year in option B, which means that 4K through 6 will be in person and 7-12 will operate in a hybrid model. One of the points of clarification that some people have asked about is, there are 2 references to the option that we are in during phase 2. We intentionally gave ourselves a little bit of flexibility there for a couple of reasons. One of them has to do with the very local district level metrics that could guide us. In other words, we could be in phase 2 as a county, but we could also have some metrics, indicators, or otherwise that's impacting us specifically to the Beaver Dam Unified School District, which could result in me moving us into option C, which would essentially be hybrid throughout. but I definitely don't anticipate that for the start of the school year. And I just want to affirm, and we would affirm, if the board is comfortable with that, we would do that through some updated communication again this week. I think it's been relatively clear, but I think there's still some subtle hesitancy because some districts have gone out and kind of affirmed some other pieces already. And I think we're at the point now where we can start to firm that up for parents and their planning. An important calendar clarification for option B. So assuming that we are going to start in option B for our school year, important calendar clarification specifically for students who are participating in that hybrid component. So again, grades 7 through 12. The first 2 weeks of school, there essentially are no Mondays. So the first Monday that the school year starts is the last day of August. So we don't have school on that day. And then September 1st is a Tuesday. That following week is Labor Day. So in order to make sure we get off on a good start and we have an equal amount of time for those different cohorts to connect in the first 2 weeks of school, what we'd like to do is make a calendar clarification for the families and essentially just lay out that for those first 2 weeks of school, the green cohort, which is letters A through L of the alphabet essentially, would go to school on Tuesday and Wednesday. Pete and his team will do a little extra cleaning, do some other pieces to make sure we're good to go for the gold cohort. That would come in then on Thursday and Friday for those first 2 weeks. Then beginning on September 14th, we would return to what would be our more standard mode of operation in the hybrid model, which would be a Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday would be an all virtual day for all those students, and then Thursday, Friday. So, but just those first 2 weeks to make sure that we don't have a significant gap to start between those cohorts and their time of contact with staff and in person in school. We would like to run those Tuesday, Wednesday, the week that school starts, and then the week of Labor Day as well. Hoping that the board is comfortable with that, and then we would obviously communicate and then over-communicate that reality so everybody who's supposed to show up and wants to show up is showing up. The next update has to do with masks and face coverings. So as we know, under the state order, obviously schools are included. In the event that the state order would change or otherwise, anything that could possibly create some grayer interpretations for schools, I think I would strongly recommend that we continue to require masks indoors when around other people, unless at some time the medical advice or otherwise from experts, and that includes the recommendations from Dodge County's Department of Health, would somehow be contrary to the fact that we would wear masks indoors when around other people. Something I think some people lose sight of the fact that the Dodge County Department of Health actually, prior to that order, was recommending that masks be worn indoors when people are around other people. I think if our Department of Health in our county still thinks it's a good idea, and other medical advice or guidance would still suggest that that is best practice, that regardless of the state of an order in Wisconsin, we would continue to do so unless we otherwise made a decision down the line. So the only reason I want to really clarify this is I think there's a chance, although be it relatively distant, I think that there is a chance that something could change with the order that could create confusion for staff, for students, for families. And I think it's really important that we just commit to we're going to have masks indoors until a time where maybe the medical advice, whether that be Dodge County Health Department, which is our local, probably our most grounding advice, or otherwise would indicate that we should consider other practices. I just don't want to deal with a decision on Tuesday and now all of a sudden we've got a bunch of people showing up on Wednesday thinking that we should be otherwise. Certainly if there was more context or that we would need to consider, we would come back and talk about that. This I just like to have available and make sure we communicate so people generally understand moving forward and we don't have that type of confusion. The other piece.
Mark, just a question quick.
Yes, sir.
So obviously under the state order, it's pretty clear on what they mean by masks and face coverings.
Yes.
But if we would move out of the state order, obviously, we'd still want face coverings. But I know there's been a lot of discussion about what that really means. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about masks, face coverings versus face shields. And I just wanted your opinion on that and whether that would ever be something that we would think about, specifically more so at the elementary level, is an opportunity outside of masks.
I think it's definitely a consideration we need to make. I think the reality is right now, based on the order that we have, we don't maybe have some of the flexibility we'd like to be able to employ. So if the order were to go away, I think we would maybe consider other types of coverings. And if, again, I would ground back to conversations with the health department and with some of our medical experts, if they still think that those are best practices that are going to help prevent the spread, then we need to consider using those. I think there's some environments that, from a school level leadership standpoint, we had kind of wrapped our head around the fact that, certain grade levels, or even, certain students who might be receiving some additional services, it's beneficial for them maybe not to have their masks mouthed or otherwise, and what other things can we do. Generally speaking, there's not as much flexibility with this order, although the last point that I wanted to reference is that there are opportunities for us to work through some points of flexibility based on students' individual realities. Those are more, not age necessarily related, those are more medical related or could be disability related. And that is a gray issue, and that can be a very stressful issue for parents and staff to wrap their head around because of the prospect of having unmasked students, for example, in school. So we are working through those individual realities, and we are going to ground some additional context based on the advice of the boards representing a law firm, as well as some additional context that we're getting from other experts. But again, I think the point that I wanted to clarify is that if the order changes, I think we need to hold firm to having masks unless the context were to change. I think we could certainly reevaluate and talk about what other types of coverings we might want to also allow in different environments, because right now the order might be considered a little bit more restrictive. But exactly what those are, I don't know. I couldn't speak to that right now.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, but I think it would be in our best interest to be proactive with Dodge County and get a feel for what their opinion might be, so that if and when the state order would be lifted and maybe would give us some more flexibility, we can act faster.
Based on the context that we had prior to the order, we knew that there was flexibility, that they had actually publicly made and put it out that they're recommending face masks or otherwise, but they were comfortable with other uses, so long as other protective efforts were made or preventative efforts were made. So I think there is some flexibility there, but they had wrapped their head around the fact that for them to say masks were recommended was kind of their stance, but they were open to some other ideas, particularly as it related to, what easy example might be working with students with some ability challenges in speech or otherwise, the opportunity to set up a different scenario for them that might include, just a shield and some other distancing or PPE would be certainly a good solution. So I think they're open, but what they're going to want to know is what other pieces are we going to have in place.
Yep. And I think if there was some flexibility in being proactive about it, just gives us the ability to, if we needed to, purchase the necessary things that we would need.
Yes.
Instead of being reactive, so.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's been somewhat challenging too for people to wrap their head around the fact that, with the mask order right now, you can still wear, we have purchased shields and some other pieces for staff, some additional PPE that they can access upon request or based on some of the needs. Right now, based on the order for the adults in particular, unless there's some other documented condition for them, they would still mask with that. So there could be more flexibility.
Can you add a little bit, it sounds like you guys are getting a little flexible with outdoor spaces as well. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit for parents or anybody that are watching?
Outdoors. So one of the things, I just had to wrap my head around that. One of the things that we're looking at is just expanding some of the use and access to outdoor spaces or facilities to allow for in-person instruction to take place in an outdoor environment. So whether that be looking at acquiring some tents or using some other spaces that would provide some cover and shade. So we're exploring that. I don't want to commit to any particular amount of spaces, but I can tell you, an easy example without even putting together, tents or otherwise, this week we do actually have the elementary music camp is taking place. That is a in-person, socially distanced, and outdoor event when they're actually participating in, using their musical instruments, and the staff have done an outstanding job. Fortunately, the weather was outstanding last week. Unique start to the week this week, but they navigate those things in reality relatively well. So we will employ, to the extent possible, some creative solutions to get kids outside too. And that's another way we reference in the plan a couple of spots where we'd like to try to find opportunities for students to be able to remove their masks and be able to, see people's facial expressions and interact more naturally. And by using, when possible, some outdoor spaces, particularly when we have some nice days to start the school year here in the fall in Wisconsin, we're going to try. That's what you were talking about, right?
Yep.
Got it. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about where we're at relative to numbers, in-person versus online choice numbers. So currently, and all this information is as of 1 p.m. today. Currently, our response rate is over 85%, so that means that over 85% of our students essentially are accounted for by their families through the choice of in-person versus online. That was part of basically step one of the registration process. We'd like to see that response rate get higher very, very soon. Some of our schools, as you can imagine, are at 95 to 100% response rate, and some of our other schools are just working through closing that gap. But we're over 85%, so we feel like we have an extremely healthy context of where our families are going to land. 80% of them have chosen to have their child come to school in person as much as possible. So again, in person for us, we start the year in option B, would mean K-6 every day, 7-12 hybrid, which is essentially twice a week. 20% of families have chosen virtual. There is some variation by grade level. It's not as extreme as you would think. It's usually within a percentage point or two. It's all right around that 20%, give or take. The biggest difference uniquely is the lowest number for virtual is at the 9th grade, the lowest percentage, so 13% of families have chosen virtual for their freshman students, and the highest percent for virtual is at the 8th grade level, which is at 27.3. So just a little bit of context for people. I will tell you, relative to that rate, while it's higher than we had anticipated, it actually has some ancillary benefit relative to establishing online cohorts in those numbers and matching up staff to meet the needs of those students. So, other districts in our region, I can tell you that it sounds like and I don't want to name them in case they haven't updated their boards yet, but I can tell you that there's a couple of districts that are in our county, a little bit smaller districts, for example. Their numbers are significantly lower than ours, would probably trend closer to the 10% range, give or take. And then I can tell you that there are some other districts in the Badger Conference that are obviously outside of Dane County that have options like we do available or similar options for students to be in person. And some of those districts actually have that percentage is 25% plus of the students choosing to be virtual. So it's really kind of all over, depending on where you're at, depending on sometimes the size of the district. What I found really most interesting was how consistent that percentage was, 20%, give or take, across all levels, K-12, again, these being the two outliers in the low and the high end. Something else I wanted to speak to was just the Canvas adoption. So as people are aware, we're a very Google-embedded district. We continue to use Google as a chief resource for us. We had used Google Classroom quite a bit, like many other districts, when we made the change to the virtual learning environment last spring. We believe firmly that in order for us to become more robust and better meet the needs of both our students and our families, as well as our staff over time, would be to move to a more formalized learning management system. And we have moved to adopt Canvas because it better positions us to flex and move as needed as we navigate in-person, hybrid, the potential for an extended virtual demand over time, depending on how things go, both locally and at the state level. It is a more powerful tool and really a true learning management system that allows us to do some things that Google might not otherwise have been able to allow us to do. It's more convenient for families, so it's easier to kind of check in on students and interact and engage and know where our children are at. And it also has a lot of resources available for it that our staff will find extremely beneficial. These things are always challenging when you make adjustments like this. I believe wholeheartedly our staff is going to do an outstanding job. We've had some training and capacity building begin already, and we know that this is a proven and vetted resource, and it's also potentially a differentiator for us moving forward as we kind of navigate some relatively unknowns. It really positions us to be able to move and provide some resources and opportunities for our kids, not just as we work through this kind of stage of the pandemic reality, but also moving into the future, what education is going to look like.
I just wanted, could you address, please, because we talked about it in our workshop some, the parent aspect, because I think a lot of parents have maybe just figured out the Google platform and maybe newly stressed over a new platform, and just reassuring that this is something that they can navigate and it'll be actually a lot better for them.
You want me to wing it, or do you want to give it a shot?
I can speak to it, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you need to come up here so they can hear you, or...
Here, go ahead.
So to speak to that point briefly, what Google Classroom doesn't allow is a parent portal or parent access to student work unless they have the actual student password to access it or watching it with the student. There will be a parent portal for families to access Canvas to see the instruction, to communicate with the educator, and support the student. So there's that parent portal, and it also comes with an app for their phone so they can be, if they are not live face-to-face with their students, so let's say it's a high school student, parent is at work, they can also be monitoring the instruction or any communication that's been going on through their phone and see that. So that's one of the significant enhancements of this LMS is the parent having access to see what the child should be doing, to be able to co-plan, support the student, communicate to the teacher, and see those tools for learning. So, and I think that's an enhancement not only for the robust virtual learning option that we have, but that will also translate to our, this year and in the future, the learning that's going on in the classroom in face-to-face instruction as well. So there's going to be much more transparency of what that instruction is, what students' expectations are, and what students' growth areas are, because families will also be able to see student performance and feedback with pretty heavy immediacy. And so there'll be a little less question about why a student maybe is performing as they are. So that's kind of a snapshot of why that parent piece is enhanced in Canvas over Google Classroom.
So there'll be some instruction for families and parents on how to get all set up on that to make sure that we can make the most of this new platform.
Correct. I foresee us creating a video or using one of the Canvas videos and distributing that directly to families to see that, and then providing, of course, ongoing support, because we all learn best by doing it. And the first time that a parent, that's probably going to be the best training, is the first time a parent needs to go in and take a look at that. So as soon as we have everything set up on the administrative side, we're hoping in the next 10 days-ish to have accounts, rostering, all that sort of thing set up, and then we can move into that communication part.
Thank you. I hope that brought a sigh of relief for a few people.
So what is, sorry, one more. What does that look, what does communication look like for the parents then? Will they automatically have notification from Canvas, like progress reports and, your child is missing these assignments, or will they have to log into the portal to track that? Or will there be two-way communication?
There are options for two-way communication in different ways. So as you're talking about to provide alerts, et cetera, we have to work with the settings, so I can't speak to exactly everything that they would be allowed to do and see. And we have the ability to control some of that at the different levels of education, what may be appropriate. What might we want to give as, formative feedback to students and the parents don't need to see right away versus a summative assignment. So there's some different settings that we can use, so we have to work through that. And then we would communicate, of course, to parents about opting in for that as well. There's some options for parents to add communication other than their email. So the default will be email coming from our student information system, Skyward. But then there's the ability, and we would walk parents through that as well, on how they can add some other communication, such as a phone, for them to receive some notifications.
And also, you mentioned the other night at the workshop that it's easier if you have multiple kids in the district.
That is another step. So when a parent receives access to their parent portal, that's one username and password to see all of their students. So they would have, if they had an elementary student, they're going to see a tile for an elementary student. At the high school level, they're going to see all the courses that student would be in. But again, they don't have to have separate passwords to access a student's Google Classroom.
Okay.
That is going to be set up in one kind of homepage for them to access. Very slick at the elementary level. High school level, just because of the nature of courses, they're still going to have a tile for each course, but they would be able to go in and navigate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. It's a good thing that he knows more about that than I do. All right, community resource location. So one of the things that I wanted to update the board and our community on is relative to the concept of community resource locations. And this really has to do with some planning that I'd like to continue doing with our administrative team members. In the event that we, either by choice or by order, need to move to a completely virtual environment. What we would like to do would be to establish 2 to 3 locations. Again, this is all subject to any order or impact, so obviously we might plan, but based on a specific order, they might not allow us to do this, but I'm hoping that we would. So essentially, we'd set up 2 to 3 locations in the district, schools, to use not as traditional schools, but to use as community resource locations in the event we are all virtual, for students and families that have specific needs relative to possibly supervision gaps because of the parents' need to be at work and the age of the student, but in particular, technology access or other resources, or food and food insecurity issues, that we would like to have some of our sites open, not functioning where they're receiving active instruction, because that would mean that under the order, our decision that we were not having school and direct instruction, but having supervision and establishing a layout and a use case on those campuses that would allow us to have some students in on a regular basis to access things that they wouldn't have access to that could get in the way of their ability to access education. So it's my hope that we would be able to establish and plan for having 2 to 3 locations. You know, an easy example, not to stress out the principals because I probably didn't tell them this yet, but an easy example might be we might have an elementary location. Maybe we use Prairie View and we say it's climate controlled, it has more space, we can spread the kids out better. And maybe we say the high school campus because everybody knows where it is. The campus is big, it's got a large outdoor space too, as well. We have a lot of resources here to provide students access to different things. So again, it wouldn't be that we would be having in-person school when we had to move away from in-person school. And it wouldn't be that we would be violating an order. We're hoping that even in the context of an order, to close school, that we would be able to use schools as community resource locations and set them up in such a way that we would be able to allow some students, the students with the most need, with the opportunity to come in and access resources they might not otherwise have available to them that could negatively impact their education or well-being, quite frankly.
Are you going as far with that, Mark, as saying some, maybe pupil services might be available there, or that depends on the order and how things
Could be, it will
play out?
depend. I think the flexibility and the reality might depend on, how often, we would have staff in. I can tell you that, my sentiment, we haven't necessarily gotten into this, and I don't want to open up too much, but, my sentiment is that if we're not in person, and there's a reason for that, I think requiring staff to show up in person every day might not necessarily be the best practice, because we could be creating other needs or drains on resources. I think they would have to come in for certain days. We'd probably work with them and our leadership to designate what's most logical for them to provide the service they would virtually. So what that would look like for, PPS staff, I wouldn't say for certain, but it would make sense to have some of those resources available. And in this case, we might not even be talking about just our PPS staff. We might be having county staff, stop by and check on students. Because again, we base it on the most need, and we'd work through identifying what that is, making those spaces available, and then opening it up gradually for other people based on space availability. But I definitely see support staff and other staff members here providing basically supervision and access to resources.
Okay.
So it sounds like you got some work to do as far as like qualifying criteria as to like who would be allowed and who wouldn't, because I can see the possibility when you look at 80% of our parents saying they'd like in-service, in-person education, and then having a community resource location where that might get
Pretty crowded.
that might pretty crowded and used quite a bit.
Right, we certainly don't want people to be upset because they don't necessarily have access to something that maybe a lot of places aren't even going to have available in this situation. I think what's really easy for us typically is to identify maybe the obvious 5 to 10% within the band of students that we think, might have the most need. We generally know really well who those students are. That's a relative no-brainer. It's within that band just above that we don't know all of the individual circumstances and situations. But I think we can handle navigating that and establishing some set criteria so we don't overpinch ourselves. And I think if it was a gradual release of that access, it's probably going to be the best way to do it. But if we position ourselves to have something and have a general understanding of how we might staff that and what those sites might be, people can wrap their head around that then.
I think that's a great idea, and that you're thinking ahead and planning this is great.
Yeah, I do too, especially with the rural areas, because technology access isn't the greatest in certain areas, so.
For sure.
Got to give you kudos for thinking ahead on that.
Okay, so a few other things. So as we had referenced before, I know the board had did take up some language relative to some staff handbook flexibility, particularly as it relates to this year. Right now, Dr. White has had some conversations with BDA leadership as well as the principals. We do plan, and I do plan on supporting us moving forward with making some adjustments to some, either the handbook language or just the practice associated with substitute sub-vouchers for personal days. So without getting into too much detail, essentially the concept of like, I cover for Chad, let's say, when he's gone and there's a need and we can't find a substitute teacher. Really, essentially, the teachers have two choices. One, you can get paid out for that, or you can use that towards earning personal days, essentially. That practice this year is not going to help us with our situation if we're able to be in school, in particular, and the anticipated substitute shortage and need for coverage. So what our intent is at this point in time is to move forward with basically paying those out. So rather than having those, banking those, and then turning those in for personal days, essentially paying you for the services rendered and not creating a situation where we're adding to the number of days where people are actually going to be out. Essentially, we inadvertently be fueling the same challenge we're trying to work through during this year. So she's going to continue to she'll have a couple more conversations with them. There's a couple other logistical pieces to work through, and then we did intend on moving forward with that practice. It is covered under kind of we'll call it the pandemic language adoption that we had. However, there are some other handbook language updates. Some of them are associated with Title IX in September, so we might provide further clarification if that's necessary at that time. Health check process. So we had talked about with the return to school plan, obviously the need. It's an absolute requirement that people go through, our families, our staff go through essentially a health check or a wellness check on a daily basis to make sure that we're symptom free or otherwise. So there's a lot of different conversation about this and what exactly that should look like. There are different resources and apps available. There's a lot of conversation about whether or not districts should actually be housing that information or should actually be monitoring that information. So there's a couple other points of clarification we're still working through, but interestingly enough, Skyward, which happens to be our student management system, has come out with a resource or tool that our staff and possibly our families could use, so we are exploring that. We will have, at minimum, some type of health check notification reminder. The question is going to be whether or not we want to be warehousing that information, and essentially that we're going to, again, anchor back to legal counsel on exactly how they want us to handle that and firm that up. In the beginning, there were some sentiments like, yeah, this will be important for contact tracing or otherwise, so maybe we should hold on to that, and then the health department would have access to that. That does not seem like it's going to be something that's necessary, but we'll continue to monitor that, and the benefit would be if we use some type of process, again, using tools or resources that families might already be familiar with, would obviously have a potential benefit to it.
Hey, Mark, for when you talked earlier about healthcare protocols or health check, and now you're talking here, are we talking for the students, or are you also talking for staff that there's the healthcare protocol?
Both for students daily and both for staff daily.
Daily, okay.
Yes.
So what does that look like then? They're just going to input their temperature, or kind of what does that process look like from a parent's perspective?
Well, I'm not saying for certain what they're going to have to submit to us. Essentially, at minimum, they're going to have to go through and basically confirm that, for themselves, right? We're trusting them to do this, that Tony didn't have any of these symptoms and he didn't have a fever and that's why he's coming to school. The big question is how much information are districts going to actually call upon and monitor families sending in? I think that's where some reservation is for some families. Some want it, some don't. But ultimately, once you start to actually take that information and create a record of that information, you also take on other responsibilities that aren't necessarily associated with our general purview of service. So I think we're going to likely land on what's the least amount of information we would collect to help ensure safety without taking in more information than we really need.
And again, you said you're going to rely on legal counsel to guide you in that?
Yes.
Right.
Activities and athletics really quickly, because this is like everything else in a perpetual state of flux. People are asking as they're hearing other things, as some people may have heard, that like the WIAC, which is essentially D3 colleges, sports and athletics in the state of Wisconsin, essentially canceled their fall season or otherwise. And, people have heard about what's the Big Ten going to do now, and a couple other large collegiate conferences actually have made decisions already relative to their fall athletics, et cetera. We are going to continue to monitor some of the WIA's guidance. We, athletic directors and activities directors across the conference and in the region have been working tirelessly to come up with some type of experience and schedules that would reflect some type of experience. But indicators would suggest that there is going to be some updated guidance and prospective decisions relative to fall activities and athletics. I do know that the Wisconsin Department of Health Service is going to have an update this week. I think it's on Wednesday that they're telling people they're going to have some kind of an update. It's probably going to reference fall sports. And then I do also know that the WIAA is going to hold another Board of Control meeting on August 14th. That is Friday. Of course, interestingly enough, the first day of official practice or otherwise for the fall sports season is actually the following Monday. So the tea leaves at this point in time would suggest that the fall season in the state of Wisconsin doesn't necessarily look like it's going to happen. I'm not going to say for certain whether it's not. I believe Illinois and Minnesota have already made that decision. And again, some of the other growing context would suggest that there's probably going to be a shift. And obviously, if the WIA makes a decision, that probably makes it easier on districts relative to their local decisions. But just so the board knows, we're monitoring the WIA piece. Depending on what they say, our plan is to either move forward with recommendations and the safest practices possible and work to develop some type of creative schedule or polish some type of creative schedule to allow those experiences to the extent possible. And at the same time, if things are canceled, they're canceled, and then we just have to move forward.
So just a question, when they come up with that ruling about the athletic seasons, I mean, we heard earlier about the importance of wellness and exercise for our staff. That applies to our students as well. So are they losing the ability to train or work out, or just the ability to compete?
So that's a great question. So in some cases, there are opportunities, and again, I don't know where we'll land, but there are opportunities to hold practices or to do some other types of training following certain protocols. But the idea of competitions with groups of kids coming into close contact with other groups of kids and going to other communities and coming into contact with other groups of kids, that is the part that, generally speaking, when things have been shut down, they're eliminating completely.
So you're not necessarily saying it'll be like the spring season where there's no team contact. It may be different.
It could be different, but I can tell you there's a lot of sentiment out there, whether or not I agree with it or not. There's a lot of sentiment to, if you cancel this season, then we got to figure out what we're going to do in the spring and the summer. I actually am a little bit of the opinion that if they are going to make a decision to cancel, then they cancel and we reevaluate early fall. Because to start to make plans for what's going to happen in, April, May, and June seems a little bit nonsensical based on the fact that everything else is changing. But I know everybody's looking for some type of concrete piece to hang on to. So anyway, more updates. I'm sure a lot more updates coming possibly Friday, Monday at the latest relative to that.
I mean, it would be nice if the WIA would just make a decision. I think it would be easier on school districts.
Yes.
And it would be nice if they do that before first contact day or first practice day, but it doesn't seem like that might happen.
Well, I think that is why they called the meeting on the 14th, which is Friday, and knowing that it's on the 17th, and I'm anticipating we're anticipating some kind of decision on that. So I know Melissa Gearing will be very glued, as well as a lot of other people, to that conversation.
I'm sure.
And then the last thing I had to do with transportation details and food security on virtual days. So Anne Marie has and will continue to work with our transportation provider and then also a food service provider. We're just working through kind of polishing up some of the logistics or considerations relative to what exactly some of the routing might look like. We have general practices and things that are part of the plan relative to wearing masks. And trying to reduce the amount of ridership or otherwise. And we do have a number of families, I'd like to thank them, who are definitely going to be transporting their own children instead of having them use the bus, so that's been extremely helpful. But there's just some details that they're still polishing up, feel good about that. And then just working through some food security planning on virtual days, whether it's hybrid days, the students, when certain cohorts are off, and virtually, might still have some food security needs. As well as on that Wednesday, what and where that looks like. So we'll polish that up over the next probably 7 to 10 days, but that's something that's on our radar and we'll have in place.
Elementary schools, what's food service look like there?
So food service at elementary schools, the actual the delivery or reception of food is going to be very similar across the entire district. Essentially, individually bagged or packaged lunch options for the students. We will use, I know you've heard in some districts where the kids are only eating in the classroom. There will be some students that are going to eat in classrooms from time to time in other spaces, but we'd like to have them be in other spaces that we have cleaned and prepared for them. So using the cafeteria, but only having a more restricted amount of students that are in there and adding a couple of lunch periods just so that they can get into a different environment, eating outside on nice days. We're going to try to do things like that. generally speaking, and that's consistent across the whole district. But, there will be times where they're eating in their lunchroom, and they'll work through some rotations, but we do want to get them out of their room too for other pieces, and that frees up, honestly, some staff resources as well, and allows people to enjoy their meal, and some time, which, the teachers and the kids are going to need a little break too during the day.
Mark, on the elementary schools, are they, when you want them to move, is that going to be kind of coordinated? This class can go at this time, or to use the restrooms, or whatever type thing like that?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
so that kids aren't going to be passing other kids in the halls and...
Well, there'll be some interaction. I mean, one of the nice things about the mask piece is that I think, we still want to have our protocols and practices in place as if we didn't have masks, but we do. So that only further enhances that. Just like in the classes, we're spacing out the seating, for example, as much as possible. Or in some cases, when students are using tables, we're using some of these flexible, small-scale barrier spaces as well. In addition to some of the masking. But the reality is kids are going to get up, they're going to move, there's going to be some exposure, but we're going to still have certain students or certain cohorts in hallways at certain times going to certain locations, so you're not going to have mass passing or concentrations. And like at the high school and the middle school, we're going to try to the extent possible where we can, we'll flow students one direction, but there's definitely going to be passing and some interaction. It'll actually be more controlled at the elementary level, and that's part of the nature of that, because when you move, even through 6th grade with those cohorts and the teachers, because usually when those kids move, they're moving with a teacher to a designated spot versus, a group of kids migrating.
With the 6th grade being all in person, and the 7th and 8th grade at the middle school being the hybrid.
Yep.
Is the middle school staff and administration thinking that's going to be difficult for them with having two different, more or less, programs going on in the same week like that?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, logistically and conceptually, it's really not that difficult. I mean, to have different students on different schedules, because the 6th grade is so structured. Their programming is going to be so structured, right? And essentially, you have at the middle school, you've got over 700 kids doing something different anyway, going to different classes or otherwise. There's definitely some logistical challenges they're going to have to navigate. They've had to do probably a little bit more planning, I'll tell you, than some of the other grade levels have done. But I think when we looked at it, we realized we have the resources to do this at one grade level, and maybe we could stretch it a little bit more at some point in time, but at least at one grade level. Why wouldn't we get essentially this elementary grade level of students that are at the middle school, 6th grade, as much in-person contact as possible safely? Right. So I think wrapping your head around that, and then probably one of the other challenging pieces is for staff members, when you've got different staff members living a little bit differently in the same house, that can always create a little bit of added maybe confusion or tension, but they're all very intelligent people and realize that these are opportunities, and if we can do them, we can do them. We're going to give it a shot. And like our whole plan option, right? I mean, we're going to do the best we can and hopefully have students in person developing relationships and learning as long as we can, the best we can. And if we need to make adjustments, we'll make those adjustments. But I don't think there's anything easy about it. I don't think there's anything easy about, teaching or being an administrator at the middle school pre or post pandemic either. It's challenging, but they're working through that. And I think people generally understand the benefit. Especially 6th, and quite frankly, the opportunity to have those kids in there as regularly as possible, and they know what they're doing, so I'm confident they're going to do a great job.
That's good.
Well, and I think it should be noted, too, the way that's set up, 6th grade's kind of isolated on its own floor, isn't it?
No.
They're not, so they'll be moving around?
No.
Okay. So one of the questions I had was the busing with the cohorts and everything. How is that going to affect our budget? Does that change considerably what we're paying out for busing?
No, we don't. So the way the busing's set up, I mean, they're still going to pick up based on kind of where you live, right? And based on the amount of people that are not going to ride, that ridership, based on the fact that they're wearing masks and there's additional cleaning protocols in place for transportation, we do not see our transportation costs going up at this point in time, unless there's something coming out of left field we're not tracking. So we can anticipate that school busing, school day busing, instructional day busing, we can anticipate that that'll be, let's say, the same, except for I believe there's fuel charge increases probably we're planning for there. But where we would see savings in transportation are kind of beyond the contract relative to activities and athletics transportation if there were changes to the seasons or something were to be canceled. So we do not see transportation costs going up. What we don't have a complete handle on is, you know, with the hybrid piece and that Wednesday and some of the other things we might still want to do even if we are virtual at any point in time, what true cost avoidance opportunities are there, if any, but I do not see transportation costs going up.
And then another one, so with the staff, can you kind of walk us through a little bit on like their comfort level? I know in the committee meeting, she mentioned that they were all talked to and individually, you know, if they weren't comfortable with coming back to school, they were all worked with individually. Would you be able to kind of speak on that for anybody that's watching? On like the staff that doesn't want to come in and the staff that does feel comfortable coming in?
Well, so, sure, I'll give a little bit of context, but because it's such a small number, I don't want to get in too much detail. But essentially, staff were provided with an opportunity to provide feedback relative to if they thought that they would be able or would not be able for some reason to return. And if there was a challenge point for them, whether it have to do with a prospective child care challenge, could have to do with a medical concern or otherwise, then essentially those people were all contacted individually and conversations have been had. If any follow-up conversations were needed, those were had. And there have been some situations that have taken a little bit more attending to. I can't say for certain that everybody's 100% satisfied, but I can tell you that people have been responded to, good conversations have taken place, and if for some reason we weren't able to maybe meet a request, it's probably because you know, that was more of a request or a feel versus a need or something that we would actually have to accommodate. But generally speaking, again, going back to the number slide, the nice thing is the way things have actually shaken out, some of the actual demand and in some case relatively strong desire matched up in many cases with that demand. But you know, we know of all the ones we know about. There could be other unique situations, but I know Nicole's done a really nice job of following up individually with people and working with them and her team and trying to navigate this unique reality as much as possible.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm gonna trick your thinking here. We spend a lot of time talking about what could happen and might happen on the negative side.
Yep.
But supposing the positive were to happen, so if things don't get worse and things continue to get better,
Yes.
how do we look at adjusting our school year to meet that scenario?
So we follow the phasing, and I think the reason we don't talk about it too much is because we're good at that, right? The more kids are here, we're really good at that piece. But you know, our phasing would look to adjust. Essentially, I mean, option B is, knock on wood, it's a pretty good scenario to feel like we can be in to start the school year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if things trend better and we get into phase 3 of the bounce back or recovery plan, then we'd be talking about, okay, what does in-person look like every day, 4K through 12? Obviously still, regardless of the phasing that we're in, and I think people generally have their head wrapped around this, parents still have that option relative to the virtual piece. But as far as in-person options, we would see if things trended in the right direction and those case numbers dropped enough and sustained long enough, Dodge County would then look to move at some point in time, possibly this fall or winter, into phase 3, which would then, in my mind, open us up to consider that. Now, we would still have to consider our own local metrics in the district and what those realities look like. But essentially, the better things get, the more in-person opportunities we're going to have for kids.
So would you be making those changes at the 9-week mark, like you'd mentioned for people changing between virtual and in-person, or would you be looking to make those changes as quickly as possible?
Yes and no. So my understanding is that when we're trending in those directions, we're going to have an idea that that's going to happen when things are looking pretty good. And when things are looking pretty good, we're probably going to have more time to respond and plan. But on the flip side of it, the side we don't want to talk about,
Right.
right? When things maybe don't look good, we're probably going to be called upon to respond in shorter order.
Right, you'll react quickly to that, but when you're coming about talking back together, because every time that you change anything, positive or negative, it's a family adjustment.
Yes.
So you'll be in constant communication, and they'll know either way, they'll know the timelines.
Yeah, we'd
for
like
either
to know.
change.
My biggest concern for our families, and I mean, based on last year, I'm sure people have become used to, unfortunately, this reality, but my biggest concern is that, you know, we're going to have possibly, basically, you know, snow days in September or snow days in October is kind of the, you know, snow days in September, I think, is the one that people are using. But, you know, there's a chance for any school district in the state of Wisconsin that because of some of the illnesses or the ability to actually staff the building, we might not be able to hold school in session at a particular school or in the district. And I think that's kind of hard for people to wrap their head around. And I certainly don't want to fear-monger about it, but it's just a reality that we could have those types of dynamics from time to time. I had an opportunity of being on a virtual conference call with a slate of, or a litany of CESA 6 superintendents and this group from Australia, which these school administrators and district level administrators from Australia, which was extremely insightful because they've been in session. They've already tried what we're going to be trying right now. They've already done that, right? They're coming up on their winter. No, they're coming up on, yeah, they're ending. I forget, but they're backwards, right? They're opposite of us. So essentially they've gone through that piece. And, you know, they said a couple of key things. One is, you know, keep your sense of humor because otherwise you're going to be a pretty miserable puppy dealing through this. And two, like, there is no perfect plan. You're going to navigate unique realities. You're going to have to, at some point in time, you might have to close a school. You might have to shut down for a week or two. Like, those are all things that probably can and will happen. And you just have to be prepared for that and accept it and not necessarily overfight it or get frustrated because none of it's really within our control. I mean, you can have practices in place, but some of the biggest exposure pieces or other things are going to happen outside of the school. And that could come back and have an impact in school. So that was really insightful. Unfortunately for them, they actually are shut down now. They're like completely, they don't call them states, they call them something else, but they're shut down there again. But they've gotten as many days as they can, and they've had an ebb and flow, and sometimes, you know, called days here or there. I'm hoping that our impact is less than they've had to navigate, but it was good insight and good feedback. Mm-hmm. We just need to embrace that reality that we're going to have to navigate some of those things, and we just want kids here as much as we can with our staff as much as we can, and whatever that looks like the rest of this year, I don't know, but I think we've got a pretty good plan in place, and I think people are going to give it their best shot. That's all we can ask.
What does it look like for somebody that's picked in person and they're a month in and they're nervous and they want to go to virtual? What are their options for that? If you could walk through that a little.
Right, so the flex into, well, their option is to go virtual. So the flex into virtual is a much more shorter return response time because logistically speaking for the in-person group, it's easier for someone to leave it than it is to consider someone coming into it and some of the planning associated with the sizes of those class experiences and some of the other logistics. So we would like, you know, everybody to probably land on, you know, identified terms. Like that would make it the most convenient. But we did call out in our plan that flexing into the virtual can basically be done in shorter order than flexing into the in-person. That's where we want to have time and use those marking periods. The caution I would have, though, for families, now again, something could come up, And absolutely, it's a need. It makes a lot of sense. To make that change is just when you're making those shifts, although with Canvas and with, operating the way we are, I think we're more flexible than we've ever been, having gone through what we've already gone through. But when you can kind of make clean breaks, it's easier for everybody, not just the teacher, not just the principal. It's actually usually easier on the student and just their learning experience. But flexing out into online is something that people are going to be able to do in shorter order. And we'll be able to work through that better than when people want to come back into in-person, which we certainly want to embrace. We're just asking for planning purposes and some of our preventative practices in place and cohort sizes that we have time to plan to receive them.
Thank you. I just wanted to, a lot of these questions, I knew the answers too, but for people that are listening, I wanted them to have the answers as well, because the foresight and planning that you guys have put into this is just fantastic. And, it's really hard to see behind the scenes all the legwork that everybody in our administration and our staff has done, that I really want to commend all the work that you guys have done, and just want to make sure that the parents can hear as well all that's gone into this, and, all the T's that are crossed and the I's that are dotted. I really commend you guys for everything that you've taken all these curveballs thrown at you.
Thanks.
So Mark, with only 3 weeks left until the beginning of school,
Yes.
when will students and families get communication about September 1st, especially for those in the gold cohort? So when September 1st rolls around, do they expect to first hour be on their computer seeing a video of their teacher teaching the class? What is the expectation? How is that laid out? How is that in writing? And how is that communicated to not only parents, families, students, but to the staff members that are expected to do something completely different for this school year, and potentially something completely different than what they would expect for themselves and their class?
Sure. So, all this has taken an exorbitant amount of work and time and planning, and not all of our resources are actually back yet. So some of those pieces they're coming yet this month. I can tell you, I'm already getting, it's interesting when, I don't know if Russ is here, but I don't know why, some people will send me questions like kids, I love it. They're like, when am I getting my schedule? When am I getting these pieces? And like, well, they're working on it right now. They worked on it for 8 hours today. They're trying to recraft and redesign and make sure everything's set up as much as possible. So I can tell you from like easy things relative to like the one-sheeter from the district and even the mass distribution and those pieces, those will happen over the next 2 weeks. That's second and third week from now, so that's second to last week, and then the in-service week of August, there's going to be a lot of information flowing out. I think what students and parents need to wrap their head around, particularly in the hybrid model, is generally speaking what days you're going to have school. There's going to be more information that you're going to continue to get. As far as time, they're going to know what time they can log on, if there's going to be synchronous opportunities, or for the students that are virtual, because we're not requiring them necessarily to log in because their family reality or otherwise, where are they going to be able to access and log into those other components? So all of that has to come together in the next 3 weeks. And I can't tell you exactly the day that it's going to be distributed.
So obviously the concern for the gold families is that September 1st is not, it doesn't look like September 1st is their first day of school. And so that is concerning in the fact that if in absence of information,
Sure.
and to most people, 3 weeks is not a lot of time. They plan their lives.
Well, their school year starts September 1st.
And so those students can then expect that first hour they will have class on September 1st virtually at home in the gold cohort, grades 7 through 12. They can expect first hour September 1st.
We are not, unless I'm missing something, we are not expecting students to be tuned in synchronously by hour. So when they're not.
But what is the expectation then for them to learn those first couple of days of school when they are not in school? So, or is their first day of school September 3rd?
Yeah, I can't answer that, all those
Okay.
details, Lisa, but I can tell you that they're going to know what's expected of them on September 1st.
Okay, because just the concern of of those students and those families where their first day of school is technically not
Virtual.
the first day.
Right.
So they will all, having high school students myself and knowing a number of those families, the fact that they will already feel like they are missing the intro pieces to their classes when those days begin is concerning. Because they're already feeling like with a hybrid model, they'll only learn half of what they need to learn. And that is concerning, especially at the upper levels. So that awareness piece of communicating to them what those expectations are, not only for themselves and their families, but also to our staff of what the expectation is, that we're not going to be able to teach just half the curriculum because you're teaching it 2 days to this group and 2 days to this group. That's concerning.
I understand. I don't have an answer for you of what all that's going to look like and the exact date that it's going to go out. But I know that information is going to be available, and I know that our staff officially start kind of next week because of some of the flexible professional development, and then they have a full week of in-service and some other work. There's a lot of intense work that has to be done in short order, and there's a lot of good planning in place, and generally speaking, we're going to hit the mark as best as we can. That's all I can offer you right now. I can't give you a date, but I know that the principals are aware of those needs. The staff are, some of them, obviously, are aware of those needs, that Mr. Myers is aware of those needs, and I think we're going to do an outstanding job.
So, Mark.
But I understand the sentiments and the concerns, but I don't have those answers right now for you.
So are you looking for the board tonight that we would approve the moving forward with option B? Is that what the motion is?
You know, I honestly, that wouldn't hurt. I don't think you have to, but I think affirming that that's the plan as of right now, and that's the district's intent to move forward with option B based on current phasing. I don't think that would hurt at all. Based on our plan design, it's not, necessarily required. But I don't think that would hurt to formalize and affirm that reality.
Yeah, I'm totally fine. I'm going to make a motion that we move forward with the information we have today, subject to changes from the county with option B. Until we
Second.
have more information, move ahead with option B.
Sorry, I jumped again on you. Second.
Mark, can I, as far as Lisa's question, what I'm understanding, or what I think, Lisa's student has, or whoever student has an 8 o'clock September 1 class.
Yes.
They don't have to take that class at 8 virtually. They can take it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
That is correct.
But the question is, at this point, we don't have any information on what that 8 o'clock class looks like, or what that teacher has done, whether or not they actually had videoed themselves or had prepared materials in advance, whether or not there's curriculum available to the students to use.
Sure.
So those are the pieces that are missing.
Sure.
Any other questions for Mark before we move forward?
I just have one other question was from a different group had asked me. I know right now there are no outside school groups using any of the school facilities. Being in this phase 2, I would imagine that would stay that way, correct? Or would there
Yeah.
be changes in that?
We don't anticipate that changing for the use of indoor facilities at this point in time. So outside, there have been a few pieces associated with some outdoor facility use, but I do not anticipate us opening up the facility use request piece for outside groups to use indoor facilities at this time.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mark? So just not required, but for clarification and direction from the board, we have a motion from Joanne, and we get a second from Laura to proceed with option B for start of the school under the current circumstances. All in favor?
Aye.
All those not in favor? All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. 9.5 brings us to recognitions. Any board members have any recognitions they'd like to discuss?
I just want to add the recognition that Tony did here to the whole administration, staff, teachers, parents who were involved in getting us to a point where we have a very robust plan in place and are able to adjust as best we can for whatever circumstances will be. I think it's outstanding what's been presented. So, thank you.
Also to Rob for taking on the equity piece. I think there's a lot of focus on, some of the racial inequalities and equity in our school district and across the, everywhere. And I really appreciate you taking that on and the legwork and everything that's going into that people will be able to see shortly.
Also, I wanted to thank all of the administration that was at our workshop last week. We had a great workshop, and it was a really great opportunity to continue to talk about the goals our district has for learning and to not be distracted by everything else, and to just think again about the fact that learning moves ahead, and we still have goals, and we still have intentions on reaching those goals. So thanks for all the admin that's working hard to make sure that happens, and the staff that will be working with them shortly.
Anybody else?
Well, this may sound like an echo of what's been said previously this evening, but I don't think it can be emphasized enough that our staff and administration, our parents and families have all had to be very, very flexible over the last, how long has it been? 7 months, 6 months? And we still don't know if and when the end is in sight. So, yeah, I would add my thanks and deep appreciation for everyone who is trying to keep all those balls in the air and keeping them in the air based on, what if this happens? What if that happens? And we still don't know for sure, so thank you. And the workshop was really great. I'm looking forward to learning more about Canvas, for one thing.
Well, and I just want to thank Laura for the presentation on wellness. I know I've been on that committee, but it's good to know that even in this crazy time, we're looking forward to doing some additional pieces on that. So,
I
that's
also
great.
use my insulated cup regularly from last year.
Mark?
Yeah, I wanted to just echo the sentiments relative to staff as well as our students and families. There's a lot of stress and anxiety, but I think we're going to do the best we can, and that's all anybody can ever ask for. New teachers and mentors, so started this week. Well, I mean, our mentors have been here for a while, but our new teachers. So just like to celebrate the newbies that are joining us and appreciate the hard work of the mentors. And the planning that they're doing. And then I also wanted to recognize and just thank the board members. So I think some people will watch stuff and they think, well, that wasn't nice, or that was in the hot seat. And Tony asks me questions sometimes. They're really good, though. It's really important for us to hear that, and the public to hear some of the questions that are out there and feel some of maybe the anxieties that are out there. So I appreciate the questions, and know that we don't know everything, but we will get working on it, and we'll try to close those gaps wherever we need to close them. So appreciate you bringing them up.
All right. We'll move on to 10, reports by the board. Start out with 10.1, operations.
Operations met July 27th. We've actually taken care of a couple of our agenda items. Our 4 board members, myself, Marge, Tony, and Joanne were present. We met at 5:30 at the Educational Services Center. Ms. Malkovich, Director of Business Services, provided an update on the Jefferson Elementary School renovation project. And we were happy to hear the project is on schedule. Costs are running over, but they're no higher than they were at the last monthly update. And I believe we talked about a board tour being scheduled for later in August, and I believe we have that date on our calendars now. Something else to note, there was also a roofing project being completed at Jefferson that was part of the summer maintenance plan as opposed to the building renovation. The next item was a discussion on the short-term borrowing situation. I'm going to bypass that because we've already made a decision as a board as to what we're going to do about that. Then Dr. White, our Director of Human Resources, provided a staffing update. We alluded to some of it in our conversations this evening, but that staffing update was with regards to COVID considerations, and she shared with us that staff had been surveyed, and those staff that indicated they might be unable to return to work due to childcare needs or the health condition of a family member had individual follow-ups scheduled and completed, and we were, at that time, told that it was likely 5 to 15% of staff, somewhere in there, may be unable to return to work, and since then, that information, along with student registrations for the in-person and virtual learning, have been considered with regards to any adjustments to staff that might be needed. She also reported that support staff assignments at that point were being completed, and preliminary job assignments and hours were going to be provided in early August, so that should be done. New hires were onboarding the last week of August, and the new teachers are starting this week. And Teacher in Service Week is scheduled for August 24th through 31st. She also gave us an overview of the updates to Title IX, which the board has also taken action on already tonight. So I will not reiterate that. And our next committee meeting is scheduled for September 28th, I believe at 5:30. And that concludes my report.
Any questions for Bev? All right, 10.2, teaching and learning.
Teaching and Learning met at the ESC on July 20th. Board committee members present were Laura Lerwick, Gary Spielman, and me. Mr. Meyer, the Director of Teaching and Learning, provided an update on the English Language Learner Review. The district partnered with CESA 2 to conduct an independent study of the district's ELL program. The results of the review will be utilized to develop and execute a collaborative action plan for program improvement. This is part of a process for the ongoing improvement to support the ELL students. He shared the key report findings, which included favorable reviews from families, increased linguistic growth and proficiency in English language arts and math for the students receiving the ELL services, an evaluation of current placement practices to provide rigorous and inclusive opportunities, increased resources and support for families, and an evaluation of school environment to ensure that it is culturally and linguistically responsive. He shared the next steps and timeline for taking action on those report findings. Mr. Meyer then reviewed a plan to form an equity advisory to allow a form of transparency and feedback of school district efforts, allowing for the strongest possible impacts to our entire district. The details of the advisory were discussed, along with the reason for calling it an advisory versus a team. An advisory group allows it to be more effective since equity is a commitment and not something that comes out of a committee. He shared the scope of the advisory and the representation that will comprise it. He indicated that the district can immediately review library and media resources to ensure that students have available resources that represent themselves. He also indicated that social studies is the next department that will be reviewing their curriculum K-12. While that will not be immediate, that is the next department that will be in review. The next committee meeting is scheduled for September 21st.
Any questions for Lisa? All right. 10.3, board engagement. Not sure if there.
I got one.
Oh, yeah, you do have one.
Yep, I was asked to help on the committee to find a new middle school associate principal, and I just really wanted to say that it was a great opportunity to spend some time with the middle school staff and administration, and to just really hear about the things that are happening there in detail as they answered some of the candidates' questions, and I am just really excited to see all the good things coming out of their hard work. So thank you for sharing that. It was a day well spent.
All right, anybody else? I'll ask now since I almost forgot about Joanne.
I was able to be part of the staff advisory team meeting last week, which I thought was very interesting, the first time I've done that.
All right, anybody else? All right. 11.1, resignations, retirements.
For your approval this evening.
I move the board approve the resignations and retirements as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the resignations and retirements as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
All those not, same sign. All right.
Then we have 2 leaves of the absence for your consideration tonight.
I move the board approve the leaves of absence as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the leaves of absence as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those not? All right.
And then we have 4 appointments for your consideration this evening.
I move the board approve the appointments as presented.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second to approve the appointments as presented. I need a roll call vote, please.
Tony Clark,
Yes.
John Kraus,
Yes.
Laura Lurbeck,
Yes.
Lisa Pansy,
Yes.
Chad Reavy,
Yes.
Gary Spielman,
Yes.
Brian Kajeski,
Yes.
Debbie Lake,
Yes.
Marge Jordan.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Takes us to 12.1, payment of claims.
No, 11.4.
11.4.
Sorry.
Close. I missed that one, too.
What is 11.4?
So, board policy updates, so
Oh, yeah.
specifically, that's a somewhat of a carryover, so those designations and some of the other required notifications of names of people reflected in policy.
So you need a,
And it's also the student representation
Yes.
on the student
Final for
representative.
student representation as well. Because that was first reading.
got it. So we need to approve those policy updates.
Yes, sir.
So we'll look for a motion to
So moved.
approve.
Second.
And a second. So we have a motion and a second then to approve the board policy updates as presented. All in favor, right, Mary?
Aye.
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 All those not in favor? All right, those are approved. Now we can move on to 12.1, payment of claims.
Are you ready? I move
Yep.
the board approve payment and claims in $5,681,281.46.
Second.
All right, motion and a second to approve payment of claims. Roll call.
John Kraus,
Yes.
Laura Lurbeck,
Yes.
Lisa Pansy,
Yes.
Chad Reavy,
Yes.
Gary Spielman,
Yes.
Brian Kajeski,
Yes.
Debbie Lake,
Yes.
Marge Jorgensen,
Yes.
Tony Clark.
Yes. All right, motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
I didn't hear any no's.
You didn't ask.
Meeting
for
is
any.
adjourned.